Hey there, welcome to the Learn of Dylan podcast. I'm Dylan and I'm so glad you're here. In this podcast, we chat with experts and insightful individuals to help you master the 3 keys to a better life. Number 1 is becoming a confident communicator. Number 2 is mastering movements. Number 3 is improving how you think. So grab a cup of coffee, get comfy, and let's learn something new together. Thanks for joining me on this journey. Welcome back to the Learn of Dylan show. Tonight I am here with Sharna again. So Sharna is a public speaking trainer. I've got her on a couple of times where we have shared things to help people become a better, more confident communicator. And I wanted to get her on tonight, and we're just gonna wing it a little bit, and we're just gonna see where it goes. But I basically want to share Sharna and my sort of expertise around communication. Sharna obviously, doing public speaking herself, and also being a public speaker trainer. And then I do feel like I can talk on this subject a bit because I've done over 2,500 fitness sales calls. So that is a lot of communicating.
That is a lot.
Yeah. And I'm proud to say that because I don't think many people would say that. And I've probably done that in the last,
No.
I don't know, 12 months. So
Wow.
I don't know anyone that's done that many calls, honestly. So I do feel like I can talk on communication a little bit. I've had some great teachers that have taught me a lot. All right,
Yeah.
we'll get into it. So Jana and I were discussing earlier what we should chat about today, and the first thing was around structure. Okay, so in sales particularly. So in sales particularly, like where we obviously follow a script, and if you don't follow the script, you don't really know where you're going. Yeah. And I'm sure Sharna has some points on that. So I'll let you lead the way with structure. But yeah, just give us a little breakdown of why our structure is so important in communication. And then I can just chime in here and there as well.
Yeah, love it. Thanks, Dylan. It's good to be back. Love these podcast chats. The one thing I think is just funny is we started this by being like, I think we're just going to wing this one today. And then we're like, so today's topic is structure. So do as we say, not as we do.
Yeah.
No, we said we're winging it, but we do have a bit of a plan for this episode. And structure is one of those things you might hear and be like, oh, boring. Structure, we get it. There's probably a formula, like you said, or a script. But the more I think about it and teach it and explain it, I'm a big structure fan because it really gives you a basis and a foundation to then build so many of your other public speaking skills on, or your sales call skills, or just communication in general. This is not just exclusive to speaking up the front. Having a structure and knowing where you are heading for the audience or for who you're communicating with gives you clarity. And if you have clarity, it gives the audience or the receivers of that message clarity as well. And then from there, you can really build on that, because the whole point of communicating, right, no matter what style it is delivering a message effectively. And we get a bit tangled up sometimes in, was it funny, or was I interesting, or was I clever? And I think we need to really be honest and strip it back to, what am I saying? What order am I saying it in? And then once we get that nailed, which we'll talk through in a little bit, it really opens up the rest of your opportunities. So structure is like number one. Don't go anywhere unless without your structure. And we can talk about what that looks like.
Yeah, I'd love you to share how you've taught people in the past how to structure a speech, and then I can share some tips on sales or communicating as well. So yeah, tell us how do you teach your students to structure a speech?
Yep. I'll start with the very, very basic level, which you probably have heard before. If you've ever done a high school English class or anything similar, we're very familiar with this whole idea of introduction, body, and conclusion. And we're probably like, yeah, we're cool. We've left that back in high school or back in the past. But I'm reviving it because it is really important to understand where your message is flowing.
Mm.
So another way of saying intro, body, and conclusion is say what you're going to say it, and then tell us what you've just said. Because, which sounds a bit repetitive, but if you're communicating, especially verbally in a speech or anything like that, you only really get one shot at that. You're not,
Mm.
if you're reading a book, you can reread that line and absorb it as you sort of need to, as fast or as slow. But if you're listening to somebody, you're doing that in real time. So if you can tell them what you're going to say. Hey, Dylan, I'm really keen to chat with you a bit about structure today in the podcast. Now, what structure is, point one, two, three. You
Mm.
go through those details and then you go, now it's really good to recap on what we've just learned about structure. So, because as our human brains, we're smart, but we're not that smart and we forget things easily.
Mm.
So that's how I like to approach it at a very basic level. And when you're feeling in that body part of what am I actually saying, what content am I packing in, less is sometimes more. I think less is
Mm.
often more. And my tip with starting with structure, starting with the content and working out what to leave out, what to bring in, is what is the one thing you want your audience to remember? What is the one thing you want
Mm.
the listener of this conversation to remember? Be very, very clear on that and then build your speech with your structure around that so that they don't come away going, what the heck was that about? Like, have you ever been in
Mm.
a situation, maybe even you might have listened to other podcasts or you might
Yeah,
have
yeah.
listened to a lecture or a speech or so, and you kind of go, and it could have been 5 minutes, could have been an hour, and you go, what was that
Yeah.
about? Right? And they might have just had the most eloquent, amazing, well researched points, but if their structure fails them to point everything into one direction, then you've just completely wasted your time, basically. And we don't want to waste people's time.
No, no, we don't. And it's funny you do mention that though. I actually had Antonio on, so he was previously on one of my podcasts,
Yeah.
and he does storytelling, so he's quite big on that. And I
Oh, cool.
actually I did learn a lesson from that, which I could say today.
Oh,
So he said, like, when you're telling a story, you want to make sure you're telling it from the highest emotional point, or like the point where the most emotion is there, and then
yeah.
hopefully they'll actually remember that. They'll Otherwise it can just be a boring story. But if they like
Yeah.
if you're telling a story and you think of, okay, how was I feeling in that moment? And you speak on how you're feeling, like using that emotion, that's when storytelling like comes to life in a way. So I thought that was
Mm-hmm.
quite interesting, and I guess that can sort of come back to what you were talking about,
Yeah.
because if you don't have that structure, and you don't have your high points and your low points, and how you use your tone as well. Like, it's when you're using a
Mm-hmm.
sales, like there's been a time, this was ages ago, where I was on a call and I was reading the script, and the person was
Mm-hmm.
like, "Are you reading a script?" And I was like, "Yeah."
Oh, I caught. I caught.
And that's because, like,
Yeah.
I wasn't using my tonality. Probably wasn't using my tonality. I was probably going
Mm-hmm.
blah blah blah, just flat out. But it's important
Mm-hmm.
to, I guess, to have those ups and downs, like, with bringing out emotion, then bringing it down, then bringing it
Yeah.
up. Like, that's how
Yeah.
you make things unforgettable, really.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if you're just like,
That's yeah.
reading a script and you're just like blah 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 blah, blah, like, just line by line, no change in your tone, or no emotion coming through your voice, then people are just going to be like,
Yeah.
"What was that?" Yeah,
Snooze, boring. Yeah.
yeah,
I've got a
that's
couple,
it.
I love that point. I've got a couple of things I can add to that if you like.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think I love that you touched on, I mean, in sales calls,
Mm.
you have a script, obviously, and in some cases, it's very important to have a very set out script so you know you can um, take them on a particular journey.
Mm.
What I will say for communication in general, like that broader sense too, and I'm sure you'll agree, is sometimes we hear structure and go, oh, I don't want to get boxed in, or I don't want to, I'm not a script kind of person. Structure doesn't equal a script. I think that's a myth we can maybe bust a
Mm.
bit there, because structure can mean just you've got dot points in your brain of I'm going to start like this and I know
Yeah.
I need to take them to these 3 points and I know I'm going to wrap up like this.
Yeah.
For us, like we're not having a script right now, but I would like to think we've got some kind of structure on
Yeah.
where we're going. So if you're a wing it person or you're a big personality person, that's fine. I'm not a script person for the most part, but structure is still important so that you know your journey and don't get lost in it. Because I've also been in scenarios where you hear people, they're charismatic and they're engaging and they're lively and interesting, but honestly, at the end of the day, you go, what did they actually say? And so you can have the
Mm.
biggest personality in the world, but it doesn't come across, or you can be much more soft spoken and mellow and reserved. But if you've got something like meaty that you're saying and it is in a structured sense, then that's where the impact will come through. So I don't want anyone to listen and think, I'm going to get, boxed in with structure. It actually gives you freedom, I think, to then ad lib or to have questions or to go on a bit of a tangent, but know you're coming back to something and you're still kind of on the right train.
Mm. And to touch on that, you're like, if I go back to sales, you are going to come across a lot more confident, especially if you've done it a
Mm.
thousand times or you practice repetition.
Yeah.
So a thing that Alex Hormozy has said, I don't know if anyone listening would know him, but he's a very successful entrepreneur, and he said the way that you actually nail a speech is by just bloody doing it 10 20 times. Because if you've done it 20 times, if you've followed a script, if you've like
Mm.
been really like anal with it, you're not
Yeah.
going to be anxious when you get up there. But if you haven't
Yeah.
prepared and you
100%.
just go up there and you wing it, you'll be like shit. So that's where becoming really confident with structure, like having a structure, having a
Yeah.
framework, it's more having a framework. That's
Yeah.
going to, yeah, just relieve that anxiety and also, as you said, give you freedom to touch on things. It's
Yeah.
like comedians. It's like comedians. They will do, and it's
Mm.
actually amazing when you do see it happen. Like I remember went to a comedy show and I've seen this guy twice, and he did the exact same joke that I saw the first time, and I was like, it
Oh,
and
yeah.
I've never experienced that. Like, and I was like, oh wow, that actually does happen. Like, they just go around and they just say the same joke because it
Mm.
hits the nail on the head, hits the nail on the head every time.
Was he kind of doing crowd
And
work for that then?
no, no,
Or was
he
it
was
just part of
just
his set?
yeah, it was just part of his set. And I
Mm.
was like, wow,
Right.
he's probably said that joke like a
Yeah.
hundred times, a hundred times, and I was like,
Yeah.
it actually does happen. So
Yeah.
it just shows you, yeah, it shows you the power of doing things a lot of the time. So like that repetition,
Mm-hmm.
but also
Yeah.
it shows like it also allows you to, well, with comedians in general, so they will spend all their time, riffing off their most popular, the ones that get the most laughs, and
Mm-hmm.
then they might sneak in one or two new ones to see if we'll get a laugh. So like 90
Yeah.
or 80
Of
or
course.
90% of their content will be stuff that they've practiced like a thousand times, and they know they can
Yeah.
bang hit it on the head, get everyone cracking up, and then they'll have a
Yeah.
little bit of freedom to just try one and see if it's gonna land.
Just throw an experiment in and see what. Yeah.
Yeah.
They won't fall apart because they've got that structure that they know has worked, right? And they know that
Oh,
they can keep coming back to that.
okay. Well, let's give it about 5 more minutes, and we'll share our sort of most valuable tips on structure. Do you have a couple more that you could share?
Yeah, I have a way of thinking about
Yeah.
structure.
Mm.
I'm not a builder by any means, but
Yeah.
I like to think of it as a house. So when you're building a house, You obviously start by decorating, putting the cushions in. You start by getting the nice matching teapot and toaster. No, you don't. You don't start with all of the frills and the curtains and the fluffy stuff. You start with the foundations.
Mm,
And your structure in your speech is like the foundation. You get that thing and you get that done well. And then you can add on, you can start thinking about the decorations and the carpet coloring and
mm,
the nice throw rug you want to put on the couch because and that's when you can sprinkle in like, your humor or your props for engagement or your different stories and things. But yeah, so my tip I think with structure is really like take it seriously because when you get that foundation right, it like I've said already, it frees up so much for you to play with and experiment with later. So my tip is just reiterating, don't try and get ahead of yourself. If you're writing a speech or any kind of communication that is has a lot of pressure, I think we try and go, oh, but the TED talkers do it like this, or oh, but Barack Obama did it like this, and we go like right to the top when we might need to just peel back a few
mm,
layers and be like, let's start with the basics,
mm,
get your structure in, think about the one thing it is that you want them to remember,
mm,
and then build the content around that. And another tip I would say as well, which seems like contradictory to what I've just said, if we've got your intro, body, conclusion. Now, your intro is where you really want to hook your audience in. You want to get them engaged, grab them with a story or something provocative or crazy. Focus on the body first, then. I would say
mm,
get your body nailed down, get those 3 points, know what you're saying. And like you said, in the process of just practicing that and just understanding and compiling the information or the content, that will then spark off ideas of, oh, I could use this as a really good hook in my introduction, or I could use this as a really good way to introduce it. But don't stress about getting too clever, I think, with your introduction first.
mm,
Get the meat down, get the content in, and then it allows you to have time to play around with the rest of your structure. And yeah, I think that's what I would say is my main little way to think about it because your content will look different for everybody, so I can't tell you what that looks like, but
mm.
knowing where to fit it in is really helpful. How about
Perfect.
you?
I love that. I just want to, we've only got a few minutes left. So I think the most important thing that you need to think about with structure is clarity, like you said. Yeah. So breaking it down into parts, having a framework, and also something that we touched on earlier before we hit record is making sure it's digestible. So making sure, especially when you're doing like
Mm.
sales calls or, you don't want to be like, reading out a whole paragraph and not getting engagement. So it's about like actually
Yeah.
just reading out one sentence, letting them like register it, like give their brain a couple of
Mm-hmm.
seconds, especially if they've never heard it
Yeah.
before. And then you could say, does that make
Yeah.
sense? Yeah, are you with me? So it's
Mm.
like you're getting that
Yeah.
engagement. So maybe that's something we can talk about on the next episode is
Yeah.
engagement. Look at that.
Ah, nice. Good
Yeah.
segue. And that's what I like, right? Because when you want to start getting into engaging and if you're on a sales call, are you with me? Are you listening? Well, not are you listening, but does that make sense? When you've got your structure and you know what are the key almost milestones or checkpoints in your conversation,
Mm,
when you know what that is, it then makes it very easy for you to know, all right, now is a good time to check in with who's listening. Now is a good time to get a pulse check on the audience because you know where you are in the journey because of your
mm,
structure. They don't necessarily know that. They don't know that at all. So it's up to you to make it very clear to them. Like you're saying in your sales call, if you just race through the script, even though there's a good structure, if you race through it and don't take the time to let them absorb it, then it falls apart too. Which is why, if we talk about engagement on the next episode, that'll be great. But that's why structure comes first because
yes.
you know then what's happening and then you can go, all right, let's get engaging, let's get some audience interaction, let's check in on them,
Mm.
and then but it provides that framework for you to be able to do that.
All right, we've got 30 seconds. The three main points that you want to give away.
Ooh, the conclusion for today because we're doing
Yeah,
our intro body conclusion.
yeah,
So I recapping, I think it would be don't undervalue structure.
yeah,
It's very important. Like we need that to sink in. It might sound boring, but it's not. It will be your savior for later on. So one, structure is your savior, if I can
yeah,
say that. Two, it provides freedom and it provides
Mm,
clarity for your thoughts so that you can clearly communicate the message.
mm.
And three, what's the third one? I think just remember that you need to have one key thing for them to go away with. Always funnel
Yes.
it to something that they can take away and go. If someone goes, "Hey, what did you learn in that podcast episode?" Hopefully they will say that structure is important. Like we didn't go on about everything else.
Yeah.
It still comes back to one key thing.
Perfect. And I'll just put a cherry on top there. I think just making sure,
Yep.
well, if you can, like making sure they're feeling emotion. If you're telling a story, make sure
Yeah.
you tell, like you're explaining around the highest emotional point of that story. So then they're going to remember that.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right, so
Love it.
we'll end this one
Sounds
and
good.
we'll jump on to the next one. All right, I'll just stop recording this. Hey, before you go, I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to these episodes. I hope you did gain some valuable insights on your path to becoming a confident communicator, mastering movement, and improving how you think. Now, remember, the journey to an enhanced life is a continuous process, and we're here to support you every step of the way. If you enjoyed today's episode, please follow, rate, and leave a review. Your feedback does help us grow and reach more listeners like you. And if you do want to follow me on any other platforms, I'd recommend checking me out on Instagram and Facebook under the handle Learn with Dylan. And feel free to shoot me a message as I'm always open for conversation. Now, until next time, stay curious and keep learning. Enjoy the rest of your day.